get you in the mood and the mindset. Then Daniel's going to take you through some examples. And then we're going to finish off with some breakout groups where we're really keen to get your inputs and reflections on what it is we're trying to achieve here and some of the barriers that you foresee to help steer us and guide us as we think about navigating this project through to implementation. Let's see. Right. So, as I'm sure all of the members on this workshop are aware of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the premise of the I5 project that we're talking to you about today is that in order to develop and deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, we need responsible managers and leaders in society. The progress report that we saw on the SDGs back in 2021 indicated, on the basis of input from a wide range of experts, that unfortunately we're falling significantly behind with regards to our progress with the SDGs. So that clearly indicates that we need to do something differently in order to be able to accelerate in this decade of delivery in order to achieve the really important development goals for the planet. However, as I'm sure most of you would have heard said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So the innovation that's needed in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals really should touch every aspect of the delivery mechanism. An important aspect of the delivery mechanism are the leaders that are going to enter into society to help us deliver those goals. And higher education, and specifically business schools, play a critical role in developing those leaders in the responsible management mindset and competencies and capabilities in order to truly have an impact. Now at Prime, we are really trying to create a global movement that helps us develop those responsible managers for the future. And we're approaching that from three dynamics. First off, the one where Prime has been focused during most of its first 15 years of inception is in the segment of knowledge development and ensuring that the curriculum that students experience within management education is permeated with an awareness and the knowledge needed around sustainable development goals and the subject matters contained within it. But increasingly, we're having a realization that it's not enough just to talk about knowledge. We also need to equip students with the skills that are required in order to translate that knowledge through into impact, then ultimately into practice. As you can see, there is the third component. So the I5 initiative, which was kicked off at the start of this calendar year, is really focused on this skills development. And we're coming at it from the approach that the pedagogical approaches that are applied by professors and faculty within business schools also needs to innovate. Because if we're going to create new leaders, different leaders with different mindsets and capabilities, we need to also train them differently. And that's what we're exploring now within the I5 initiative. The I5 initiative was created with some seed capital, seed financing from the Lego Foundation. And as I mentioned, it started early on this year, and we're really just at the early developmental stage. And that first development component really is around two areas. One is the development of a playbook, which Daniel and his team at Project Zero are leading. And then the second aspect is really looking at assessment and the role that assessment plays within higher education as a means to embrace different forms of pedagogical approaches that can potentially develop those responsible leaders of the future. So that's what Daniel and I are here to talk to you about. But as I mentioned at the kickoff, we want to get a little bit hands-on in order to illustrate firsthand what we mean by different pedagogical approaches. So we're going to start with a bit of workshop engagement from you all. So if you wouldn't mind reaching for your smartphones, what we're going to do is we're going to do a little exercise. And that exercise is going to be to build a digital duck. So let me just stop sharing for a second. So get your smartphones ready. And what you're going to see on your screen in a second is a QR code. So you need to pull up your camera and point it at the QR code, and hopefully it will download for you the means for you to start your digital duck building. So can everybody see that QR code on their screen? Give me a thumbs up. Yeah? Great. Okay. Point your cameras at the QR code. Click on it. And then what you should see is the screen downloading. You're going to be connected to a pond, and then a little button comes up that says quack. Press on that quack button. And then what you're going to get is a little tutorial on how to build a duck with 6 digital bricks. You can either do it in 3 dimensions, or you can click in the top left-hand corner and switch it over to 2 dimensions. For those of you that are perhaps a little bit more digitally challenged, I would recommend using the 2D version. And then what that's going to encourage you to do is to use those 6 bricks, arrange them, click them together as if they were Lego bricks in order to make yourself a digital duck. And then when you're happy with your creation, you'll get a little button coming up. The quack button will come up again. And then if you press the quack button, it will send your duck into the pond. And you can see the pond on the screen at this point in time. You're welcome to build more than 1 duck. So just click build another duck when you've sent your first duck in there. And also when you built a duck, you'll be asked to submit a word that reflects how you're feeling at this point in time with regards to your digital duck building, what your experience is, so you can give us some instantaneous feedback. Whoa, there's some great ducks coming in here. But I'm not sure everyone's managed to get their ducks up yet, so keep going. I'll give you 30 more seconds. Yeah. Now we're rocking. Oh, that's a classic there. Some people are being admitted to the workshop at this point in time. They will be wondering what is going on. Here's some of the words that are coming in. I love it. Some people feeling emotional about their duck. A sense of achievements there. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to have to stop it there and stop sharing for a second. Actually, let's go back to the presentation. Can people see the presentation? I can't see the people. Hang on.
Not yet, John.
Okay. Yeah. Let me call presentation back.
Yeah, I can see it now. Thanks. Yep, perfect.
Cool. Thank you, everybody, for those duck participations. Now, there was a huge amount going on in your brain while you were doing that digital duck building. There was some visual perception. You were thinking, digging out your long-term memory as to how to connect Lego bricks together, and also how they relate to ducks in terms of mental imagery. Doing a bit of intimidation. Some of it, some maybe a little bit better than other. Spatial visualization, symbolic representation. You were pulling from short-term memory, using fine motor skills. All sorts of aspects of your brain were being engaged as you were doing that hands-on exercise. However, the level of engagement is fundamentally different versus if you were told very simply by me at the start of the exercise, build that duck. So instead of having the agency and the opportunity to explore and be creative and get emotionally engaged, there's a very different level of engagement versus an exercise that is very linear and already pre-prescribed. So that's a very simple illustration of how we're trying to challenge the higher education system in order to invoke different pedagogies to develop responsible managers for tomorrow. So with that, let me turn it over to Daniel.
Thank you, John, and thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Daniel Wilson. I'm the director of a research center at the Harvard Graduate School of Education called Project Zero. And as John mentioned, the work that we're doing is in the early stages, but it's focused on what John has introduced. I mean, how is it that we can change the different kinds of patterns and pedagogies in the classrooms that can support the sort of capacities and goals that we have for leaders of the future. So I'm delighted that I'm joined in the Zoom call with a close colleague, Amber Camila. She and I at Project Zero and some other colleagues are working with a few of you who are on this call. So I look forward to the feedback that we'll hear in the small group conversations. What I'd like to do is, jump off the duck example and begin to think about, well, what does this look like in a classroom? What would it look like to create different pedagogies that would support this new kind of leadership? And I'm going to ask folks to mute if you can, or maybe Paloma, if you've...
Can you mute?
Maybe. Yeah, thanks. Thanks. And I'm going to share a quick example and then tease out what we're finding already working with a number of faculty in prime signatory schools. And then we'll end with a conversation and where the work might go in the coming years. So let me ask you a quick question, and I'm going to share my screen. And the question is this. First, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see that? All right, thank you. Question is this. Can you sew a button? Seems like a silly question, right? Can you sew a button? And this is a question that Professor Natasha Radcliffe-Thomas and her colleagues ask students at their classes at the London College Business School of Finance. And it's documented in a really interesting case study that they put together. There's I'm happy to share these slides afterwards. It's a kind of maybe a fun question to wonder about. It's also, interestingly, an important question as we look to sustainable business practices. Why is that? Well, what Natasha and her students do with that question is they first find out that very few people can sew a button. I mean, in a recent study in the UK suggested that almost 60% of people polled cannot sew a button. And when Natasha has asked students in a recent class, only about 12% of the students could sew a button, 3 of 24 students. Now, why is this important? So she and her class begin investigating, that almost 40% of clothes are discarded because of repairable damage, like broken buttons. And 85% of textiles and clothing end up in landfills. And the textile industry and textile recycling lags far behind glass and paper and plastics. And so they use the button and why so many of us might discard clothing as a way to understand unsustainable business practices, particularly in fashion, things like overproduction, supply chains, manufacturing. All of that contributes to make the fashion industry the second highest contributor to global carbon emissions. So our students begin with a very practical question, and it sort of opens up the systems of sustainability in the fashion industry. In her class, they explore how they can make a difference, not just conceptually understanding this, but our students explore sustainable business practices through a number of strategies. They do critical investigations. They look at tags on their clothing that they're wearing and ask questions about where were they made? What's the monthly wage of a textile worker there? She reports that many of her students are surprised that the price of their sweatshirts and hoodies are often the same as the worker's monthly earnings. And these exercises aim to build not just the knowledge and skills of thinking about sort of the systems, but also to raise questions about one's own values and ethics and assumptions. They engage in collaborating with local experts and startups in their communities. They work with them to think about how they can not just learn about ideas of sustainability, but how can they work with marketing and how can they work with new businesses as they're planning to create more sustainable business practices. They do live cases in which students role play and understand how other organizations who are committed to sustainable practices grapple with some of the tensions and dilemmas of sustainable practices in various parts of their business. They do envisioning workshops. They partner with other students from other universities to build new future, imagine new possibilities for sustainability in the fashion industry. And they focus on problems and design innovative solutions. And, last but not least, they proudly learn how to sew a button. And over time, throughout the class, Natasha and her colleagues have documented many, many important shifts in students' thinking. And here's just two. One student said, I used to think not much. I was more naive and believed many businesses held good ethics. And now I think it is not taken as seriously as it should be. It needs to be more transparent. And another student in the class said, I used to think sustainable fashion was a marketing tool for business. Now I think it's really something some brands are pursuing to help the people, the environment, and the world. Okay, that's just a window into a classroom that takes these kinds of pedagogies to support a different kind of leader seriously. And, I've been in sessions in the talk so far in this conference, and there are many interesting things happening in your classrooms and many classrooms in this network. And so part of the work that we're doing is to try to curate and understand a variety of these practices so others can learn how to support a new kind of leadership. Now, a couple caveats. The example I just shared is from one course, and it's from a particular cultural context. So we should always be cautious about what we may take away and use in other places with other learners. However, there is a really important lesson from Natasha's class, from John's duck exercise, and other examples that we've heard about in this event. And that lesson is this: effective practices for teaching responsible leadership and management reflect contemporary research on how learning happens. We must never forget that when a lot of pedagogical practices were created, 100, 150 years ago, that we still see and use today, those practices were founded with almost nothing was scientifically known about learning. We know a heck of a lot now. We know that learning is not a passive, individual, transmission-only, decontextualized process. It's much, much more than that. And John's diagram of all the things you are feeling and doing reflects research findings over recent decades. And look, you can't learn how to become a responsible manager or leader from just a lecture or a book. We all know that. Learning is dynamic and it's deeply rooted in situated practice. So the work with Prime in this I-5 initiative is to examine how classrooms and professors like you, I'm sure, and Natasha and others support effective learning for leadership of today and tomorrow. And based on the early days of this work and other research, which has happened across different kinds of domains, what we're finding is that professors engage in several types of key practices. And there are 5 of them. Make learning meaningful. They facilitate active engagement. They develop supportive interactions designed for iteration and foster joy and well-being. Now, I'm going to say a little bit about each one, but as I do so, I want to invite you to think about these 2 questions. How do these 5 practices, which are reflected in not just the work that we're doing with Prime, but in decades of work in learning science, how do these 5 practices connect to your experience as a teacher or as a learner? What resonates with you? The second question is, what challenges or questions emerge for you for broader adoption? So if you think about others doing these kinds of practice, what are some of the puzzles or sort of key challenges that you see? Okay, take some notes. I'll breeze through these 5, and then we'll have time for small group conversation about these 2 questions. So what are these 5 practices? Well, I suspect many of you are doing this already. First is they make learning visible. It reflects the educators intentionally find real life, purposeful experiences on compelling topics and ethical dilemmas and moral issues that provoke critical reflection on and surface learners' values and beliefs and theories of the self and the world around them. So they find those juicy topics, those real world examples, and they engage in those critically. I mean, a button is just a button, but Natasha created a frame where the button can be surprising. You know, a clothing label is a clothing label, but we can investigate that and actually surface a lot of deeply held assumptions and be critical of a lot of the systems that organizations and businesses and leaders are trying to navigate. There are a number of competencies these kinds of strategies, making learning meaningful, target. And here are just a few. These kinds of strategies target competencies of building self-awareness and introspection. They clarify values. They can foster investment in motivation, moral and ethical reasoning, and critical reflection on assumptions, beliefs, and biases, and more. That's one set of practices, finding those meaningful topics, areas for exploration. A second is facilitate active engagement. I don't think I need to say much about this. Many of you do really interesting things. I've seen some examples already of simulations and other ways that we actively engage learners in hands-on, but also minds-on experiences in which the learners are developing the thinking and the contextualized practices and the agency to find and navigate and solve problems. So we're both doing things, but also doing the active thinking and developing a number of competencies like empowerment and efficacy. And in leadership specifically, the problem finding and framing and the future visioning, thinking with complexity. These are competencies leaders need to have, but also as they're weighing a number of the ethical and moral and ecological trade-offs of their business, they need to be thinking with others around how to navigate these. So facilitating the active engagement, not just the passive reception of ideas, is critical. A third strategy is designing for iteration. This is crucial. If you think about the kinds of things Natasha's doing with her students or the Duck experience, these are iterative. What we know in learning science is that deep understanding develops over time through cycles of performances or actions in which feedback is provided. And these are opportunities, these performances, for taking risks and experimenting, learning from mistakes, and making changes in the thinking and action. So once is never enough. This idea that we're engaged in cycles of trying and getting feedback is the iterative nature of designing. Those are 3 strategies. Let me round it out with 2 more that we're finding in gathering examples from the Prime community. Develop supportive interactions. We probably all are engaged in different kinds of collaborative forms of learning in our classrooms. This is crucial as we're thinking about the next generation of leaders. How is it that we're developing the supportive collaborative processes in which the learners are gathering and observing and listening, thinking and communicating, negotiating conflict, and acting with others, importantly from different perspectives, practices, and cultures. We live in a world today where we cannot myopically think that we're the only ones who share, who have a point of view that others share. There's so many different perspectives, and a successful enterprise in today's world needs to understand the cultural differences, the cultural synergies, and importantly, where cultures have different kinds of values. They target competencies like collaborative engagement and deep listening and perspective taking, negotiating and resolving conflict, and many, many others. These are competencies that many colleagues across PRIME have cataloged as sort of essential for the next generation of responsible leaders. And lastly, and I think this is probably, interestingly, as important as the other four strategies, in these classrooms, we're fostering joy and well-being. We're designing for learners to experience delight, satisfaction, excitement, enthusiasm, enjoyment, other positive affective states, along with the consideration of the whole person. Emotion is a catalyst for learning. And we know that emotions can oftentimes nudge folks into being receptive to change, or freeze people so they aren't able to change. So as we think about the kinds of competencies leaders should have, we also need to think about how they themselves are developing this kind of emotional capacities in their own practices, developing emotional awareness and regulation, resilience, cultivating sense of belonging, creative positive climate. There's lots of research which shows not only we're going to be frustrated as we initiate change, it's going to be taxing, but how can we be resilient? And positive affect is one of those key features of this. Okay, that was a quick tour of 5 practices that we're documenting, mapping from research findings into learning, but also mapping them onto pedagogies and strategies that many professors across PRIME currently are using. We'll say a bit more about where the work's going at the end, but let's give ourselves some time in small groups. 2 questions John and I really would like to hear your feedback on. One question in your small groups is, how do these 5 connect to your experience as a teacher? What resonates? And the second is, what challenges or questions emerge for you and for broader adoption? Now, we're going to break into small groups. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I do want to ask folks to, if you could preface your name. You can go in and if you hover over your image, you can see a blue box, and there's 3 dots in one of those blue boxes. If you could click on those 3 dots, you'll see a little rename in the drop down. That'll allow you to change your name. You don't have to change your name entirely, but if you could just preface your name with dean or faculty or student, that will help the folks who are organizing this session break us into groups, small groups. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to change your name. How are we doing, folks? You changing names? Oh, I see a professor. Nice, Abby. Thank you. Nice. See people changing to faculty. Thank you very much.
And Daniel, people also shared in the chat. So we have, for people who didn't know how to change it, they shared in the chat. So I think we are ready to go.
Okay, you lead the way, Paloma. You can break us into small groups.
Yes.
And we'll see you in about 10 minutes.
Yes, thank you.
For the folks who are here, while there are small group conversations, we have some moments. So love to, I think, John, I would love to hear thoughts about what connects, what do those 5 strategies connect to your experiences?
Could I just say that I've come back into this room because there was nobody else in my room.
Of course.
So I'm a
welcome back.
I'm a very interesting person to talk to, but there's nobody to talk to.
Oh, we can certainly, if there's,
So if somebody wants to reallocate me, that would be good.
Let's see.
I was in room 12, which was obviously a 1-person room.
Hey, Jonathan, we're going to reallocate you.
So sorry.
Room 10 seems to have 2 people. Oh, but they're not joined. I see. Some people are not joining.
I think some people have been a bit naughty and gone off for tea.
Oh,
yeah.
Room 3 looks good. I love Paloma's got the guiding hand.
Yes, we're working on it. So sorry. Okay.
No worries.
It seems that the people who are here is either our team or they're not really here. So
No worries. No worries. Oh, Natasha's here. I'm gonna pop into the room.
Nice. Hey, Paloma,
yes.
do we have a means of communicating with the breakout sessions? Because I just want to make sure that we do capture the key points, and I'm not sure we stress the
So
method of capture.
What we can do, if you want, we can reconvene them in like 4 minutes and then let people share. Or maybe we can reconvene
But
them.
I don't think we'll have enough time in 4 minutes for all of the groups to share out verbally.
So do you want us to share information in each breakout a room, like instructions about maybe collect or share in the chat, or?
Yeah, exactly. Just to let people know to share in the chat their reflections on the 2 questions, so that because people will be bouncing into another session after the end of this one, we run the risk of losing the feedback.
Correct. You got it? Can you send a message to everyone?
I can drop something in the chat.
No, sorry, I was talking to Ye, the host. We're on it, John.
Okay, cool. James, are you just joining us now? You're on mute, by the way.
I was on this morning for about an hour or so, and I just hopped on again now, back and forth.
Okay, so just so that you know, people in the session are in breakout groups at the moment, just discussing a couple of questions, and then we'll be reconvening in about 3 minutes, just so that you don't, you're sitting there wondering what the heck's going on. Is it all sort of ground to a halt?
I'm just trying to absorb. I was a businessman for 35 years, and now I'm an adjunct at Fordham. And I teach finance, ESG, and sustainability. And as much as I'm somewhat educated, I feel like I'm under a waterfall with my mouth open, right? I'm sure everybody is, right?
Yeah, I know what that feels like.
Oh my
Yeah.
word, it's amazing.
Well, thanks for jumping in. And it's great that you've got the combination of finance and ESG. I was blessed to have that corporate responsibility of those two items for the Lego group. And it was such a rich, fertile intersection of thinking through historical means of assessing performance and incorporating more future-looking societal measures. So it's great you've got the opportunity to teach.
What I found, and it might be interesting for you. Do you remember? You look like you're old enough. Do you remember Phil Donahue?
Yeah.
So Phil did a series of interviews with Milton Friedman, who strongly advocated for carbon taxes. Very few people would think that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's
so way back in the 19 separately about
way back
about what's happened to Friedman's equity over the last 12 months. It's been a bit tough. I think his name's been used in vain in many contexts.
Yes, most certainly. But that was back in the 1970s. God bless him. So he was a believer back then.
Hey, folks, welcome back. I hope you had a good opportunity to connect with some folks that perhaps you didn't know. And we have a few minutes left. What I'd like to do, John, I would love to hear particularly what emerged from your conversation around the challenges or questions. So what I'd like to do is invite you to take, 30 seconds and write in chat, like what kind of came up in your conversation, or like what's a challenge or question that emerged for you in hearing about these 5 kinds of strategies, particularly for the broader adoption of these strategies. We think about other professors learning how to do this.
Or students receiving it as well. If you're from the student cohort, how are you feeling about your willingness to have these different forms of pedagogies, given that they may be a break from what you've experienced to date in your career? So this will be really valuable for us so please type away in the chat. We'll capture it all and assimilate it.
I'm just noticing. Thank you. Folks are posting in chat. Yeah, designing for iteration is an issue. Yeah. Spaces. Yeah, how to keep curriculum up to date. Assessment issues. Shortening the length of iteration cycles. Yep. Time efficient. Yeah. How to do this in asynchronous courses online, right? Yeah, and how to change the mindsets and expectations of students who might prefer to just sit passively by. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, let me say a little bit about some of these challenges and where the work's going. So as John mentioned, we're in the early stages and we're working with a number of folks in this session. So we're working with about 18 professors who are nominated from each of the global regions of PRIME. We're in the early stages of mapping the known research around learning and pedagogy onto the practices that exist within PRIME professors who are committed to developing a new generation of leaders to be more responsible. So we have some working white papers that we expect will be shareable in the summer and the fall. And there'll be a process. John, do you want to give a little voice to some of the next steps? Go for it.
You keep going. You keep going.
No, but you actually had some points.
Yeah, I was, I think in the interest of time, just to give an overview of what's next. We have a 3-year program. So we really want to lean into this and get some early experiences. So there, as I mentioned at the lead off, we're developing a playbook. Daniel's team is leading that, and we're also developing an assessment framework through an organization called Facilitators. And most importantly is that we are interacting extensively with the 17+1 chapters of Prime in all corners of the globe in order to ensure that we're getting examples and experiences from all contexts. Because as Daniel's stressed, it's really important to meet faculty, meet business schools, meet students as to where they are at this point in time, and not assume that there's going to be a single implementation or execution that's successful, but instead developing for all of the various contexts around the world. But what we are keen to do is to get started and explore, because what we want to really challenge the paradigm is we can't really expect different forms of leaders to emerge if we continue along the same educational path that we have done for the last century or so. So to explore what are the ways in which we can adapt our pedagogical approaches in order to equip the students with those breadth of skills that we know will be critical for them to have the biggest societal impact. So I want to respect your time. Thank you everybody for your engagement today, both in the forum in general, but also in this workshop. And please feel free to send through any other reflections that you may have on the 2 breakout questions. We really appreciate it. Thank you all so much.